I was a shy intern. I saw a deaf old man being ignored in our lobby, so I greeted him in sign language. I had no idea the CEO was watching. Or who that man was. The towering glass building at the corner of Madison Avenue and East 44th Street shimmered under the morning sun, a monument to ambition and achievement. Haley Morgan, 22 years old and fresh out of college, stood at its entrance with a knot of nervous energy twisting in her stomach. Clutching her canvas tote bag to her side, she double-checked the address for the fourth time. This was it, her first day as a summer intern at Cortec Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech firms in New York City. She stepped into the building's vast marble lobby, where polished floors stretched like mirrors and conversations echoed lightly beneath towering ceilings. The air smelled of citrus cleaner and freshly brewed espresso. Men and women in sharp suits moved with purpose, tapping away at their phones or murmuring into Bluetooth headsets. Haley's 10 flats squeaked softly with every step, reminding her she was already out of rhythm with this world. The reception desk stood like a fortress of glass and brushed steel. A woman behind it, perfectly composed and manicured, barely looked up as Haley approached. After stating her name and showing her ID, Haley was directed to the elevators and given a visitor badge that felt heavier than it looked. Inside the elevator, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls. Her blazer was slightly too big, her curls a little frizzy from the summer humidity, and her expression, caught between excitement and terror, gave her away. She told herself to breathe. Blend in. Do your job. And, above all, do not attract attention. The 25th floor housed the Internal Communications Department, where Haley would be spending the next 10 weeks. As the elevator doors slid open, she was greeted by a wall of light and noise, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and distant voices echoing in conversation. Her supervisor, a brisk woman named Marla who wore power suits and spoke in clipped sentences, gave Haley a 5-minute tour of the floor before dropping her off at a desk that looked barely used. Her first assignment was simple: observe. Read over internal memos, familiarize herself with ongoing projects, and, if possible, stay out of the way. Haley kept her head down, barely speaking more than a few polite greetings. Every time someone walked by, she stiffened. Every laugh she overheard felt like it could be about her. Her biggest fear wasn't making a mistake, it was being noticed. By the end of the day, her head was spinning. She had made 0 friends, spoken fewer than 20 words, and spent most of her lunch break alone on a bench in the nearby park, nibbling at a dry turkey sandwich. As the office emptied out around 5:30, Haley decided to leave quietly, unsure whether anyone would even notice her absence. Back in the lobby, she waited for her turn at the security turnstiles when something caught her eye. Near the large glass windows sat an elderly man in a gray blazer and newsboy cap. His posture was upright, but his expression was one of quiet confusion. People passed by him without so much as a glance. The receptionist was now engaged in conversation with another employee and seemed to ignore the man completely. Haley watched as the man gestured with his hands, quick, deliberate movements that sparked a memory deep inside her. He was signing. American Sign Language. She couldn't catch everything, but the flow of his hands was unmistakable. He was trying to ask for something. Directions, maybe. Assistance. No one responded. No one even slowed down. For a moment, Haley hesitated. This wasn't her business. She didn't want to step out of line or do anything that might draw attention. But the man looked so isolated in that sea of motion, so misplaced in a lobby filled with hustle and purpose. Something inside her stirred. She walked slowly toward him, heart pounding in her chest. The clack of her shoes on the marble floor felt deafening. As she approached, the man turned toward her, hopeful. She raised her hands and signed carefully, hoping she still remembered how. "Hello," she signed. "Do you need help?" His eyes lit up. A broad smile broke across his face, softening the worry lines that time had etched into his features. He signed back with a speed that overwhelmed her at first, but she caught the gist: he was waiting for someone. No one had spoken to him all day. He had asked, but no one understood. They conversed for only a few minutes. Haley used simple signs, relying on the vocabulary she had learned years ago from her grandmother. He told her his name was Harold. She didn't ask for more details, she was too nervous to pry. But when she said goodbye, he reached out and squeezed her hand gently. The gratitude in his eyes said more than words ever could. She left the building feeling strangely different. She had spent the entire day trying not to be seen, yet in that final moment, she had stepped forward. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't planned. It just happened. She didn't know that someone had seen her. She didn't know who Harold really was. But the gears of change had already begun to turn. The next morning, the office buzzed with the usual rhythm of a Wednesday in Midtown Manhattan. Phones rang, inboxes overflowed, and caffeine flowed like lifeblood. Haley arrived at her desk 10 minutes early, still unsure if anyone remembered she was even there. She quietly unpacked her laptop, opened the internal dashboard, and began reading the memos she had left bookmarked the night before. A few colleagues passed by, offering polite nods or forced half-smiles. No one asked how her first day went. She didn't expect them to. By 10 o'clock, she was on her second cup of coffee and knee-deep in the latest communication strategy outline when she realized she had forgotten to submit her building access request. Without it, she'd have to keep checking in as a visitor every day. She stood up, took a deep breath, and headed back toward the lobby to speak with reception. The elevator doors opened to the familiar cold shimmer of the lobby floor. She walked toward the reception desk, rehearsing what she would say to the administrative assistant, short, clear, and polite. But as she crossed the main floor, she stopped mid-step. The old man was back. He sat in the exact same chair as the evening before, positioned near the large window that overlooked the street. His posture was slightly more slouched this time, but the same worn cap rested on his knee, and he wore the same gray blazer, though now slightly wrinkled. His eyes moved slowly across the room, watching people as they passed, none of them paying him any mind. A security guard stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyeing the man now and then with vague suspicion but making no move to intervene. The receptionist glanced up from her screen only once before returning to her emails. Something about the scene felt even colder today. Less like an oversight and more like deliberate indifference. Haley's throat tightened, but she didn't hesitate. She changed direction, walking past the reception desk and straight toward the window where the man sat. He looked up the moment her shadow fell across the floor. Recognition sparked in his expression. He smiled faintly and raised his hand in a small, almost shy wave. Haley signed, "Good morning, Harold." His smile widened. "Back again?" she asked. He nodded, then signed something quickly. She furrowed her brow, trying to follow. His signing was smoother than hers, faster, filled with abbreviations and habits that she wasn't fluent enough to fully understand. But she gathered enough. He was waiting again. For someone. He had an appointment. He had arrived early. She signed back, "Do you want me to check for you?" He nodded again, grateful. Without drawing attention, she turned and approached the reception desk. The assistant was still glued to her monitor. "Hi," Haley said gently, keeping her voice steady. "The man near the window, his name is Harold. He said he's waiting for someone. Do you know if he has an appointment?" The receptionist looked up, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Sorry, who?" "The elderly man over there," Haley said, gesturing subtly with her head. "He's been here since early morning, I think." The woman blinked slowly, then checked her screen. "There's no Harold on today's visitor log. Could he be meeting someone who forgot to register him? Look, if he doesn't have a badge, he can't go past the lobby. If he's waiting, someone will have to come down and get him," she said with finality, turning back to her screen. "Security's aware." Haley stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The unspoken message was clear, not her problem. She returned to Harold, signed the update, and offered to wait with him for a little while. He seemed relieved by the offer. They began to talk, slowly, with Haley asking him to repeat signs now and then. She learned that he had once worked in the building, many years ago. He had friends here, people he used to know. He didn't say much more than that. His answers were clipped, distracted. He kept glancing toward the elevator, as if expecting someone to appear any second. 15 minutes passed. Haley checked the time, apologized, and said she needed to get back to work. Harold signed, "Thank you," followed by something that made her pause. "You see people." She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and smiled. As she turned to leave, she noticed something new. Across the lobby, near one of the elevator banks, stood a man in a dark gray suit, arms crossed. He wasn't looking at his phone or speaking to anyone. He was watching her. Their eyes met for only a second before he turned away, stepped into the elevator, and disappeared. Haley blinked, unsure if she had imagined the look. The moment was gone. She returned upstairs, pushed the encounter to the back of her mind, and buried herself in work. But that wasn't the last time she saw Harold. He returned again 2 days later, same seat, same blazer. Again, no one approached him. Again, the receptionist ignored him. This time, Haley didn't hesitate. She joined him, greeted him, and they spoke for longer. He asked about her work. She told him she was just an intern, only here for the summer. He nodded, listening intently. He didn't talk much about himself, but he seemed to enjoy her company. Every time she stood to leave, he would squeeze her hand and thank her. His eyes, though kind, always carried a shadow of something deeper, something unsaid. On the 4th day, she found him in the same spot. But this time, there was something different. 2 men in suits approached him as she was mid-conversation. One of them, older and with a silver tie, addressed Harold by name, but not in ASL. He spoke aloud, as if Harold could hear him. Haley instinctively stepped back, but stayed close enough to observe. "Mr. Whitmore, they're ready for you upstairs," the man said. Harold nodded, stood slowly, and gave Haley one final look, an expression full of silent gratitude. He signed, "See you soon," before walking away with the men. That name echoed in her mind. Whitmore. It sounded familiar. Very familiar. Back at her desk, curiosity gnawed at her. She opened the company's internal archive, a collection of press releases, history timelines, and leadership bios. It took only a few minutes to find what she didn't know she had been looking for. Harold Whitmore, co-founder of Cortec Dynamics. She stared at the photo on the screen, a black and white image from decades ago. A younger Harold, standing beside a much younger version of the current CEO, both of them smiling, holding the plans for the company's first prototype server. Her heart raced. She hadn't just been talking to some lost retiree. Harold had built this place. He wasn't just part of the history, he was the foundation. And yet, no one had recognized him. No one had acknowledged him. They had let him sit alone in the lobby for days, confused and forgotten. Haley leaned back in her chair, stunned. She had no idea what any of this meant. But she had a feeling things were about to change. By the end of her first week, Haley had grown used to walking through the lobby with a heightened awareness. Every time she crossed those polished floors, she couldn't help but glance toward the window-side chairs, half expecting to see Harold waiting. But after their last interaction, when he was finally escorted upstairs by 2 suited men, she hadn't seen him again. The silence left behind felt heavier than she expected. Her work upstairs remained routine. Intern tasks, monitoring emails, reviewing style guides, proofreading newsletter drafts. Marla didn't seem particularly invested in her presence. She was polite but distant, only speaking when necessary. Haley, still relatively unnoticed by most of the team, continued keeping her head down, trying not to overstep. But a quiet shift had begun. It wasn't loud, not yet obvious, but something in her had changed. It started with curiosity. She began staying later in the evenings, lingering in the internal documentation archives, poring through old newsletters, employee profiles, company-wide initiatives from previous decades. Each piece offered glimpses of the past, snapshots of a company built not just by tech or capital, but by individuals who believed in something more. She found old internal interviews with Harold Whitmore from the early 2000s, grainy videos with subtitles describing his passion for accessibility in technology. One clip, barely 2 minutes long, showed him at a staff town hall saying, "Innovation without inclusion is just another form of elitism." It hit her harder than she expected. The following Monday, Haley stepped off the elevator to find something new pinned to the bulletin board in the corridor outside the communications department. A printed sign, plain, no logo, no flair. Just bold black letters on white paper. "Who is the girl who speaks with her hands?" There was no name, no signature. Just that single sentence. A cold flutter crept into her chest. She looked around. A few people stood nearby, reading it silently, their expressions unreadable. No one said anything. But she noticed how eyes lingered on her a bit longer that morning. How conversations slowed when she passed. How someone paused mid-sentence when she entered the break room. It wasn't overt hostility. Just tension, subtle but undeniable. Later that day, while getting coffee in the break room, she overheard two junior associates whispering near the fridge. "She's the one who was talking to the old man, right? I heard she's some kind of activist or something." "No, she's just a summer intern. Probably trying to score points." Haley stepped back into the hallway before they saw her. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had just said hello. That afternoon, she received a message from someone in human resources. The tone was oddly vague. "Would you have time for a brief chat tomorrow morning?" No explanation. No subject line. Just a time and a room number. She arrived early the next day, sitting stiffly on the edge of a minimalist white chair outside a small glass-walled meeting room. At exactly 9 o'clock, a tall woman in a burgundy blouse greeted her with a measured smile. Her name was Clara Hensley, Senior Associate for Workplace Culture and Development. Inside the room, Clara offered Haley water and asked a few harmless questions about how her internship was going. Haley answered politely, unsure where this was leading. Then Clara folded her hands over a legal pad and asked, gently, "Can you tell me how you met Mr. Whitmore?" Haley hesitated. The question sounded casual, but the room felt too quiet, too intentional. "I didn't know who he was," Haley admitted. "He was in the lobby. I noticed he was trying to communicate in ASL, and no one was responding. So I spoke to him." Clara nodded slowly. "You're fluent in sign language?" "Not fluent. I learned growing up. My grandmother was deaf." "I see. And did Mr. Whitmore identify himself to you during these interactions?" "No. He said his name was Harold. That was it." "And how many times did you speak with him before he was escorted upstairs?" "3 times, Haley said carefully. Each time he seemed to be waiting for someone. No one else approached him." Clara made a note on her pad, then looked up. "Do you understand who Mr. Whitmore is?" "I looked it up after," Haley said, her voice quiet. "I didn't know at first. But I read some of the archives. I saw his name." Clara leaned back. Her tone remained neutral, but there was a subtle shift beneath it, something tighter. "There's no issue with you speaking to him, Haley. I want that to be clear. But in this environment, things are structured. Sometimes actions have unintended consequences." Haley didn't respond. She wasn't sure how to. After a long pause, Clara smiled again, more rehearsed this time. "That will be all. Thank you for your time." The conversation ended there, but the unease lingered. Back at her desk, Haley couldn't stop thinking about what Clara had meant by unintended consequences. She hadn't broken any rule. She hadn't gone beyond her role. But it was becoming increasingly clear that her actions had not gone unnoticed, and not everyone appreciated them. Later that week, during a quiet afternoon lull, Marla appeared at Haley's desk without warning. She had never done that before. Her tone was unusually soft. "Hey. Come with me." Haley followed her through the maze of glass-walled offices and sleek hallways until they reached the elevator. No explanation was given. They rode down in silence. Marla didn't look at her. When they stepped into the lobby, Haley's heart skipped. Sitting near the window, just like before, was Harold. This time, however, something was different. He wasn't alone. Beside him sat a younger man, perhaps in his 40s, well-dressed but relaxed, speaking softly into Harold's ear and receiving signed responses in return. As Haley and Marla approached, the man stood. "Haley Morgan," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Benjamin Whitmore, Harold's son." Haley blinked, surprised. She glanced at Harold, who smiled and waved. "I've heard quite a bit about you," Benjamin said. "From him. And now, from others." She nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "I'd like to ask a favor, if you're open to it," he continued. "Would you stay a while? My father wanted to see you." Haley sat down beside Harold, who immediately took her hand in his and began signing with clear excitement. She interpreted what she could, occasionally turning to Benjamin for clarification. For nearly 20 minutes, they talked, about nothing urgent, nothing profound. But the warmth was unmistakable. Before she left, Harold signed something carefully, as if choosing each word with precision. "You reminded me people still care." She felt her eyes sting. Marla said nothing during the entire exchange. But as they rode the elevator back up, she finally broke the silence. "For what it's worth," she said without looking at Haley, "he hasn't smiled like that in years." Thursday morning arrived without fanfare. Rain clung to the tall windows of the office, casting gray shadows across the desks. Haley sat at her workstation early, as she often did now. The office wasn't full yet, just the hum of machines starting up and the faint thump of someone setting down a mug too hard on their desk. Her inbox, as usual, was mostly newsletters and internal updates. She was halfway through an article draft on interdepartmental communication practices when a small pop-up appeared on her screen. It was a calendar invitation, simple and stark. "Meeting with Executive Office, today, 11 o'clock. The sender was Melissa Huang, executive assistant to the CEO, known throughout the building for her unreadable face and relentless precision. No subject, no agenda. Haley stared at it for a full minute before clicking accept. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't done anything wrong. She kept her head down. She'd helped someone, Harold, and then let the attention fade. That should have been the end of it. At 10:55, she stepped into the executive elevator for the first time. Unlike the usual chrome box that ferried employees between the lower floors, this one was lined with dark walnut paneling and silent as a tomb. No elevator music. Just the sound of her breathing. When the doors opened, she found herself in a hallway unlike any other in the building. Plush carpet muted her footsteps. Art lined the walls, abstract but elegant. At the end, a large frosted glass door bore only a small, metallic plaque, Executive Office. Melissa greeted her with a nod and motioned her inside. The room was vast, with a sweeping view of Manhattan stretching behind a long conference table made of polished oak. On the far end of the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows, stood a man in a tailored navy suit. His back was to her. "Ms. Morgan," Melissa said. The man turned. Haley recognized him immediately. She had seen his photo in the internal communications, in press releases, and on the company's website. Richard Thompson, CEO of Cortec Dynamics. He was taller than she imagined, his silver-streaked hair perfectly in place, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. He approached slowly, hand extended. "Ms. Morgan. Thank you for coming." Haley took his hand and tried not to show how cold hers felt. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," he said, gesturing for her to sit at the conference table. She nodded, sitting down across from him. "I saw you," he said plainly. "In the lobby. With Harold." Her stomach dropped. I was on my way out for a meeting. I saw the exchange from across the room. I didn't interrupt. She nodded again, unsure what to say. Very few people in this company have ever taken the time to speak with Harold, he continued. Even fewer knew who he was. Most have forgotten. Or never learned. Haley swallowed. I didn't know either. Not at first. And yet you spoke to him. In his language. Without being asked. Without expecting anything in return. There was a long pause. Do you know why Harold was in the lobby that day? He asked. She shook her head. He was visiting for the first time in over 6 years. After his stroke, he stopped coming. Said the place didn't feel like his anymore. That we'd lost our soul. He came back to see if anything had changed. If there was still a reason to believe in what we built. Haley sat frozen, the weight of his words slowly settling. You gave him that reason, the CEO said. Another pause. I brought you here because I want to understand something, he continued, his tone shifting. You're not a senior associate. You're not in management. You haven't even completed your internship. And yet, your name has been on more executive-level conversations this week than most directors get in a year. Haley blinked, unsure if it was meant as criticism or recognition. I read your personnel file. Impressive academic record. Good references. Quiet, reliable. No complaints. No accolades either. You didn't come here trying to climb. You came here trying not to be seen. She nodded slowly. But sometimes, he said, the right person gets noticed for the right reason. He reached into a folder on the table and slid a single piece of paper toward her. This is not a reprimand. It's not a promotion either. Not yet. But I'd like your help with something. Haley glanced down. The document was a temporary assignment form, an internal transfer, effective immediately. It placed her under a new supervisor, the Director of Internal Engagement Strategy. You'll be assisting with a review of our internal communication culture. We've lost something over the years, something Harold cared about deeply. I want to know what it would look like if we got it back. Haley stared at the form. You want me to help fix company culture? I want you to help us remember who we are, he said. And I want you to keep doing exactly what you did in that lobby. Speak with your hands. Speak with your heart. The words caught her off guard. They weren't polished like a speech. They sounded personal. Honest. He stood, and the meeting was over as swiftly as it had begun. Back at her desk, her old team didn't ask where she had gone. They barely looked up. An hour later, she received a welcome email from her new department lead, a man named Jonah Reyes, who requested an initial sync the following morning. Attached was a briefing packet, dense with bullet points about inclusion initiatives, cross-departmental surveys, and dormant programs the company had shelved in previous budget cycles. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment staring at the skyline through her bedroom window, the events of the day played on loop. She had walked into that office expecting, at best, a reprimand. Instead, she had been given something she hadn't dared imagine since the internship began, a voice. She didn't sleep much. The next morning, she arrived at the new floor. It was quieter than the others, less corporate in its design. More open space, warmer lighting, even a few walls covered in whiteboard paint filled with sketches and ideas. Jonah was already waiting, a laid-back man with curly hair, thick glasses, and the easy confidence of someone who didn't need to remind anyone of his title. I read about your conversation with Mr. Whitmore, he said as he shook her hand. That took guts. I didn't think anyone was watching, she replied. They always are, he said. Especially when you're doing something right. He briefed her on her first task, an audit of current internal engagement practices, particularly related to accessibility and communication transparency. It was a big job, especially for someone so new. But she felt something strange as he spoke. She wasn't afraid. And for the first time since she stepped into Cortec, she didn't feel invisible. The office where Haley now worked felt like a different company altogether. While her previous department on the 25th floor had been cold, rigid, and silently competitive, this space had a hum of quiet collaboration. No one barked orders. No one whispered behind backs. Conversations flowed freely, and ideas, not hierarchy, seemed to guide decisions. Still, she felt like a guest in a room she had not been invited to enter. Her new colleagues, most of them in their 30s and 40s, were polite but reserved. Jonah, her supervisor, was the only one who made a point of checking in regularly. He never hovered, never questioned her credentials, but he had a way of reading her tension and responding before she could express it. By midweek, she had reviewed over 60 pages of internal documentation on company inclusion efforts from the past 5 years. Many programs had been proposed. Most had been shelved quietly before reaching any implementation stage. She noted patterns: good intentions drowning in bureaucracy, pilot projects starved of resources, internal surveys whose feedback was never publicly shared. Late one afternoon, Jonah stopped by her desk with a folder in hand. "You're ready for something heavier," he said. "We're preparing a proposal for the next quarterly review with the executive board. Harold will be attending. We'd like your input." She paused. "Harold?" Jonah nodded. "He's agreed to sit in as a guest advisor. It'll be his first time in years." Haley felt the weight of it. The idea of Harold sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by suits and executives, after being ignored for so long, it didn't feel corporate. It felt personal. "The board doesn't know what to make of it yet," Jonah added. "Which is why we're starting small. A gesture. Something visible. Something that shows this isn't just a public relations stunt." He placed the folder on her desk and tapped the top page. "We want to understand how you learned to see him. Not just Harold, but people like him. Forgotten people. Unheard people. What shaped that awareness in you?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I know how to explain that." "Try," he said. "We need your voice in this." That night, she stayed late, long after most of the floor had emptied out. She stared at the blank page on her screen for nearly half an hour before writing anything. When the words finally came, they were slow, deliberate. She wrote about her grandmother, how she had lost her hearing in her early 60s and how Haley, just a child at the time, had refused to let her become isolated. She wrote about learning ASL from library books and internet videos. About how hard it was, how frustrating at first. And how eventually, it stopped being about signs and started becoming about connection. She wrote about how most people only look when they expect to be looked at in return. And how that one small habit, choosing to see instead of being seen, had changed everything. She submitted the document just after 8 o'clock, closed her laptop, and rode the empty elevator down in silence. The following morning, she found a handwritten note on her desk from Jonah. "Read it. Powerful. We'll build around it. But the CEO would like to speak with you again. Today. Noon." This time, she didn't panic. She arrived at the executive floor early, Melissa greeting her with the same unreadable professionalism as before. The meeting wasn't in the large boardroom. Instead, she was led into a smaller, warmer space, a lounge-like office with a bookshelf-lined wall and a small seating area near the windows. Richard Thompson stood by a table, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Cream or sugar?" he asked. "Black is fine," Haley replied, caught slightly off guard by the informality. They sat across from one another in soft leather chairs. The atmosphere was quiet, almost intimate. "I read what you wrote," he began, no preamble. "I've had a lot of interns come through this company. None of them ever made me stop what I was doing to reread a single paragraph 3 times. She said nothing. You said something near the end that stuck with me. About how we only look when we expect to be looked at in return. That's uncomfortable." He looked her directly in the eyes. "But you're right. And we're paying the price for it." Haley watched him carefully. There was something in his tone, fatigue, perhaps. Or regret. I want to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer, he said. She nodded. Why did you really stop that day in the lobby? You were nervous, new, not part of anything. What made you walk toward him? Haley considered her words carefully. Because he was being erased in plain sight. And I knew what that felt like. The answer hung in the air. He didn't press further. Instead, he leaned forward. We're preparing something for the next board review, he said. Something different. Harold is helping shape it. So are you. We haven't told the board yet. We'll need your discretion. She nodded, unsure where this was going. There's a shift coming. Cultural, structural. It's not a campaign. It's not branding. It's remembering who built this place. And who we've let disappear. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin file, setting it on the table between them. This is your work now. We want you to contribute to the internal launch document. Not as a ghostwriter. As a voice. Her name was already printed on the draft cover page. Haley stared at it. But I'm not. You are, he interrupted. You've already started shaping it. You just didn't know. There was a long silence. Is Harold okay with all this? She asked. He's not only okay, Thompson said. He insisted. She nodded, slowly accepting the truth she had been tiptoeing around since that first day. She wasn't an intern anymore. She was becoming something else entirely. And she was just getting started. The following week began with an energy Haley couldn't quite name. Not urgency exactly, and certainly not chaos. Nothing in the new department ever moved without intention, but there was a tension in the air. A quiet buzz of something approaching, just beyond the horizon. She could feel it in the way Jonah reviewed drafts with sharper attention, in the way the floor's usually open layout had suddenly gained closed-door meetings. Even the intern from the analytics team, who usually smiled at everyone in the hallway, had started keeping his head down. Haley had been assigned to co-develop the introductory communication piece for the internal culture reset project, which still hadn't been given an official name. She was deep into revisions when it started. First, it was a glance, 2 junior associates from the marketing floor standing near the elevators, looking in her direction as she stepped in. One of them leaned in to whisper something. The other half smiled, then quickly turned away when she noticed Haley looking. Then came the mutters. At first, soft enough that she could pretend she hadn't heard. She's the one they're pushing. Must be nice to skip the ladder. She probably cried in front of Harold or something. Later that afternoon, during a break in the pantry, she overheard 2 employees from the branding team. Intern with executive access. Unreal. They say she's the reason Harold's back. Or she's just good at being seen. Haley didn't confront them. She returned to her desk and worked twice as hard. By the end of the day, someone had left a sticky note on her keyboard. No name. No handwriting she recognized. Just 3 words, written in capital letters. Know your place. She stared at the note for a full minute. Not out of fear, though it did strike something sharp and bitter in her chest, but because of how calculated it was. Whoever had written it hadn't just acted out of impulse. They'd waited until she left her desk. They wanted her to find it alone. They wanted her to doubt herself. She folded the note, placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, and said nothing to Jonah. Not yet. The following morning, Haley arrived early, as usual, only to find her screen frozen. IT had locked her out of the system. At first, she assumed it was a system-wide update. But when she checked with a colleague, she realized she was the only one affected. She reached out to support. The tech who responded, a young man named Devin, looked uneasy as he reset her access. Looks like your account was flagged for unusual privilege elevation, he said, eyes on the screen. What does that mean? It happens when someone without the usual clearance suddenly gets permissions higher than their role. I was moved to a temporary assignment under Jonah Reyes. It was approved by the executive office. Devin nodded slowly. That explains it then. But, weird, someone flagged it. Who flagged it? He shrugged. That part's not logged. As the day continued, Haley noticed the shift growing louder. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. People who had once greeted her politely now acted as though she was invisible, or worse, an inconvenience. It was as if someone had decided she didn't belong, and others were starting to believe it too. Midweek, she stepped into the restroom and caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired. She hadn't realized how much tension had settled into her shoulders, her jaw. She tried to breathe through it, to remind herself that what she was doing mattered, that Harold had seen her, that Thompson had trusted her. But it was hard to hold on to that when the walls themselves felt like they were watching. Back at her desk, she found a memo waiting in her inbox. Subject line, HR check-in. The message was brief. Please stop by Clara Hensley's office at your earliest convenience. Again, no explanation. Clara's office on the 12th floor hadn't changed, still minimalist, still cold. This time, she didn't offer water or small talk. We've had some feedback regarding your new assignment, she began, folding her hands on her desk. Haley kept her expression neutral. What kind of feedback? Concerns, Clara replied. From several departments. About favoritism. Chain of command. Role clarity. So, people are upset that I was assigned to a temporary project by the CEO? Clara gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's not how it's being framed. How is it being framed? As a disruption, Clara said. And we're simply asking for cooperation as we manage internal cohesion. Haley blinked. Are you suggesting I step back? I'm suggesting you consider how quickly attention shifts in this company. And how fragile goodwill can be. It wasn't a reprimand. Not officially. But the message was unmistakable. When she returned to her desk, Jonah was waiting. I heard they called you in, he said, his tone low. Haley nodded. Apparently I'm a disruption. You're doing your job. And you're doing it well. She hesitated, then asked, is this going to get worse? Jonah sighed. You challenged a system that rewards silence and status. That doesn't happen without resistance. But I didn't challenge anything. I just saw someone. Exactly, he said. That's what they're afraid of. Later that week, as she was preparing materials for the upcoming review, a message came through from Melissa, the CEO's assistant. Mr. Whitmore has requested a brief meeting with you tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Executive Lounge. The next morning, she arrived on time. Harold was already seated near the window, a cup of tea in hand. Benjamin, his son, sat quietly nearby, reading over a folder. Haley approached, greeted him in ASL. Harold smiled and signed back. He asked about her work, her health, her writing. She answered, feeling a wave of calm she hadn't felt in days. After a while, Harold paused, signed something slowly. People are talking. She nodded. I know. Are you afraid? Haley hesitated, then signed, a little. Harold's response was firm. Good. That means you're paying attention. But don't stop. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. When he handed it to her, she unwrapped it slowly. It was a silver pin, shaped like a hand with open fingers. The symbol for communication. I wore it when we launched our first inclusion initiative, Harold signed. I want you to wear it now. She stared at it, unsure what to say. Harold signed, they don't get to decide your value. You do. Haley closed her hand around the pin, the weight of it grounding her. She didn't say thank you. She signed it instead. And Harold smiled, as though that meant more. By the end of the following week, something had begun to shift, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. The tension around Haley's presence hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. The whispering grew quieter, less frequent. I still followed her, but now with curiosity more than disdain. What hadn't changed was her focus. She showed up early, left late, and poured herself into the cultural restructuring document now circulating in draft form through executive channels. The silver pin Harold had given her remained tucked discreetly on the inside of her blazer. She hadn't displayed it publicly yet, it didn't feel like the right time, but wearing it felt like armor. A quiet declaration of who she was becoming. Jonah called her into his office on a Tuesday morning. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. "I want to show you something." He opened a file on his tablet and handed it to her. On the screen was a collection of internal emails, time-stamped and catalogued. Most were routine, employee memos, departmental updates, early drafts of company policies. But near the bottom, one string of messages stood out. They were dated 6 years ago. The sender, Harold Whitmore. The recipients, executive leadership. The subject, concerns regarding cultural decline and inclusion neglect. She looked up. "These are from before his stroke," Jonah said. "Before he stopped coming in. He tried to raise red flags. He saw what was happening, the shift in values, the erosion of what he helped build." Haley scrolled through the thread. Harold had raised concerns about communication breakdowns, the loss of accessibility initiatives, and a growing culture of internal isolation. He had asked for transparency. He had pushed for follow-ups. And each time, his messages had been acknowledged, but not answered. "They ignored him," she said, not hiding the bitterness in her voice. "Worse," Jonah said, "they sidelined him. Made him honorary without influence. Gave him titles but took away his authority." Haley kept reading. One email, near the end of the thread, hit her like a punch. "If our company cannot hear those who built its foundation, we deserve the silence that follows." She sat back, letting the words settle. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked. "Because we're going to publish a historical context piece as part of the rollout. A narrative that connects the present initiative to the past. I want you to write it." Haley hesitated. "You want me to document the company's failures?" "I want you to tell the truth," Jonah said. "The story of what we forgot. And how we're trying to remember." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Does the board know about these emails?" "Some do. Most won't want them brought up." "Then why let me write this?" "Because Harold insisted." She wasn't surprised. But she was overwhelmed. That night, she opened a new document. She began by listing key events from the company's history, launch dates, public milestones, employee recognitions. Then she inserted the missing pieces. The silences. The gaps. The decisions not made. The voices not heard. Her writing was different this time. Sharper. Less cautious. She no longer feared being noticed. By Thursday, the first full draft of The Forgotten Thread was complete. She submitted it to Jonah, then returned to her desk, drained but proud. The next morning, an unexpected message appeared in her inbox. This one wasn't from HR or executive staff. It was from a woman named Monica Hart, listed as a former CoreTech employee, retired, no current title. Subject line, "I read your piece." Confused, Haley opened the message. "Dear Haley, you don't know me. But I knew Harold. I worked with him for 25 years. I saw what they did to him. I watched the silence grow around him like walls. I just wanted you to know, you said what none of us could say back then. You're not just writing history. You're repairing it. Monica." Haley stared at the screen, stunned. She forwarded the message to Jonah. A few hours later, he called her into the small meeting space off the main floor. When she entered, she was surprised to find not just Jonah, but also Benjamin Whitmore, Harold's son. He greeted her warmly, then gestured for her to sit. "My father read your piece," Benjamin said. "He asked me to tell you himself, but he wanted to wait until next week's meeting." Haley waited, unsure what was coming. he said it was the first time in a long while that he recognized the company in its own story. Jonah added, "We're submitting your piece as the official preface to the rollout document." Unedited. Her heart raced. Benjamin leaned in, more serious now. "There's something else," he said. "Something we want you to prepare for." Haley nodded, waiting. "We're bringing Harold to the board meeting. Not just as a guest. He's going to speak." "Through an interpreter?" she asked. "No," Benjamin said. "He asked if you would stand with him. Translate in real time." Haley blinked. "You want me to interpret for Harold in front of the executive board?" "He trusts you," Benjamin said. "And frankly, so do we." She swallowed hard. "When is the meeting?" "Next Friday. You'll have time to prepare." She felt dizzy. Not from fear. From the weight of what it meant. She had started this internship hoping to avoid attention. Now, she was about to stand beside the man who built the company, reintroducing him to the very people who had forgotten him. Later that day, as she rode the elevator down to the lobby, a thought passed through her mind so quickly it almost didn't register. They were no longer ignoring her. They were listening. The formal invitation came in the form of a sealed envelope, delivered by hand to Haley's desk the following Monday morning. The envelope was ivory, heavier than standard stationery, and embossed with the Cortec dynamic seal. Her name was written in flowing script across the front, no intern, no title, just her name. Inside, the message was brief. "You are hereby invited to attend the executive advisory session on Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning, held in Boardroom A, attendance confirmed by Mr. Harold Whitmore." No explanation. No agenda. Just confirmation of what had already been decided behind closed doors. She was going. Jonah appeared 10 minutes later, leaned on the side of her cubicle, and gave a short nod. "So? It's official." Haley nodded, too nervous to speak. He glanced at the envelope on her desk. "They don't send those to just anyone." "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm not trained to interpret professionally. And I've never been in a boardroom." "Harold doesn't care about polished," Jonah replied. "He cares about clarity. Honesty. And you've already proven you can give him both." Haley took a breath and said nothing. The week passed in a strange blur, hours of quiet preparation layered over a rising tide of anticipation. Benjamin met with her twice to help rehearse Harold's prepared remarks. They weren't long, no more than 5 minutes of signing, but they were packed with weight. Every sentence had been considered. Every pause intentional. But Harold also made it clear that he didn't want her to memorize anything. He wanted her to interpret it live, in her own words. "I trust her," he signed to Benjamin during their final rehearsal. "She'll say it better than I could have asked." Haley hadn't slept the night before the meeting. She paced her apartment, rehearsing her posture, her tone, the rhythm of her hands, the pace of her voice. She tried to imagine what the room would feel like, the polished table, the high-backed chairs, the eyes on her. By the time the sun rose, her nerves were brittle but steady. She dressed carefully, navy blazer, dark slacks, white blouse. No flash, no statement, just clean lines and quiet confidence. She wore the silver communication pin Harold had given her on the inside seam of her jacket. At 8:45, she stood outside Boardroom A. Melissa Huang opened the door without saying a word and motioned her inside. The room was vast, glass-walled on one side, with a panoramic view of the skyline. At the long oval table sat 11 board members, each with a portfolio, tablet, or notepad. Richard Thompson sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Harold Whitmore had already taken his seat. Benjamin stood behind him. An empty chair was waiting next to Harold. Haley crossed the room and sat, her heart hammering. No one introduced her. Thompson cleared his throat. "We'll begin." Standard updates came first, financials, projections, regulatory items. For 30 minutes, Haley sat in silence, barely breathing. No one addressed her. No one even looked in her direction. Then, halfway through the agenda, Thompson folded his hands and said, "Before we move into the next section, Mr. Whitmore has requested a few minutes to speak." The room shifted subtly. A few board members stiffened. One adjusted his glasses. Another tapped a pen on her portfolio. Harold stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Benjamin moved to his side but didn't speak. Haley rose too, standing beside him, eyes focused, mind clear. Harold began to sign. She watched, absorbing the cadence, the flow. Then, in a steady voice that didn't betray her fear, she began to interpret. "My name is Harold Whitmore. Many of you know me by title. Fewer know me by action. Even fewer by presence." The boardroom went completely still. I have watched this company grow, evolve, stumble, and shine. I've watched from inside, and then from outside. I've seen its best years and its worst decisions. He paused. Signed again. I was not pushed out. But I was let drift. Slowly. Quietly. No doors were slammed. Just never reopened. Haley's voice remained steady, even as her fingers trembled slightly at her sides. Then, one day, someone opened a door. He turned his head toward Haley briefly, then back to the board. She did not know who I was. She did not do it for points, for attention, for a job. She spoke to me in the language I had been waiting years to hear again. Another pause. She reminded me that culture is not policy. It is behavior. He signed more quickly now, and Haley kept pace. She reminded me that silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes it means waiting. Watching. Hoping. Haley's voice caught for just a second, but she pushed through. I am not here to ask for a legacy. I already have one. I am here to ask if you still want yours. The room remained still. Harold sat slowly, and Haley followed. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Thompson leaned forward, elbows on the table. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, he said. And thank you, Ms. Morgan. He looked around the table. What you just heard was not a speech. It was a mirror. Silence. Then one of the senior board members, a woman in a crimson blouse, spoke. Are we prepared to act on what we see? Another leaned forward. This is not a PR strategy. If we move forward, it's a commitment. Thompson nodded. Agreed. We're not here to discuss appearances. We're here to realign reality. He looked back at Haley. I'm proposing we move forward with a new initiative, full inclusion restructuring, co-led by internal engagement and with oversight from an independent advisory team. Harold will serve as the founding advisor. Haley Morgan will serve as internal liaison and communications strategist. Murmurs moved around the table. A few nods. One or two skeptical glances. Finally, a vote was called. The motion passed. 9 in favor. 1 abstention. 1 dissenting vote, quiet, but not unexpected. When the meeting adjourned, Harold took Haley's hand and signed just 3 words. You did it. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was shallow. But her eyes were bright. Steady. Awake. As the boardroom emptied, Thompson approached her. You're not an intern anymore, he said simply. We'll finalize the paperwork this week. She nodded. Thank you. He held her gaze a moment longer, then walked away. Benjamin placed a hand on her shoulder. You understand what this means, right? Yes, she said. It's not going to get easier. I know. But it's going to matter. She looked out the window, the city sprawling beyond the glass. I want it to. 2 days after the board meeting, Core-Tech dynamics began to feel different. The change wasn't in the decor or a sudden shift in policy, it was quieter, deeper, harder to name. but those who paid attention could sense it. People looked up more when walking down the hall. Conversations at coffee stations lasted longer than a nod and a refill. And although the whispers about Haley hadn't entirely stopped, they had taken on a different tone. Respect. Curiosity. Caution. Haley's new role wasn't marked by a formal announcement, but word traveled fast. Her former supervisor, Marla, passed her in the hallway and paused just long enough to offer a nod, not quite congratulatory, but no longer dismissive. Others from her old floor avoided eye contact altogether, which suited Haley fine. She had no time for petty power dynamics now. Her days were filled with strategy meetings, content drafts, and planning sessions. She had been paired with a small cross-functional team tasked with mapping out the first phase of the new Inclusion and Values Initiative. Harold remained involved as advisor, but he preferred to observe more than instruct. When he did speak, through Haley or Benjamin, it was never to dictate. He asked questions, listened carefully, pushed others to remember what had once mattered to them. Haley's influence, however, began to extend beyond her assignments. One afternoon, while reviewing training outlines in a quiet corner of the 12th floor, she was approached by someone she barely recognized, Lena Doyle, a senior development analyst known more for her closed-door demeanor than her presence in company culture discussions. "I read your historical brief," Lena said, "no introduction. The part about silence being designed. That wasn't just powerful. It was precise." Haley looked up, unsure whether to respond with gratitude or caution. "I've been here 18 years, Lena continued. I remember when Harold stopped coming. We didn't talk about it. We just adapted. Got used to the silence." She paused, then added, "You reminded us that silence is a choice." Then she walked away. Encounters like that became more frequent, small acknowledgments in elevators, brief conversations in hallways, a sticky note left on her monitor with the words, "Don't stop talking. We're finally listening." But with the growing awareness came growing resistance. On a Friday morning, while preparing internal FAQs for the upcoming rollout, Haley received a flagged message from the legal department. The subject line read, "Historical claims in the forgotten thread." The tone was cautious, bordering on clinical. "We have reviewed the original draft of the historical context document. While the piece is approved for cultural and internal use, we advise adjustments to phrasing in sections referencing prior leadership decisions, as these may imply negligence or deliberate exclusion." She forwarded the email to Jonah without a word. 15 minutes later, he appeared at her desk. "You're not changing a word," he said, firmly. "They want me to remove the line about being let drift quietly," Haley replied. "They want you to make everyone comfortable again," he said. "But that's not why we brought you here." Still, the pressure mounted. Monday brought a veiled comment during a department meeting from a manager who wasn't even on her team: "We should be careful not to let storytelling replace policy." On Tuesday, someone altered her presentation slides before a strategy session, toning down the language, removing Harold's quote from the opening. She noticed just before stepping in and restored the original copy without asking permission. After the session, she found a message in her inbox from a junior comm specialist: "Careful. You're starting to make enemies." She didn't reply. That night, Haley returned to the company archives, not the digital ones, but the physical files, housed in a forgotten storage room on the 7th floor. Few visited anymore. It smelled faintly of dust and disuse, but the shelves were filled with binders, printouts, and documents from decades past. She pulled 3 labeled boxes and began digging, looking not just for proof, but for voices. Old employee newsletters, anonymous suggestion box compilations, surveys from long-forgotten diversity efforts. Names she'd never heard. Projects that had never made it past pilot. Initiatives buried not because they failed, but because they were inconvenient. One folder in particular caught her attention. It was dated 12 years ago. A training program designed for inclusive management practices, including ASL education, cultural communication strategies, and trauma-informed leadership. Proposed. Budgeted. And then, suddenly, stamped with a red, archived, not pursued. No explanation. She photocopied 3 key pages and added them to her growing personal file. Not as ammunition. As memory. As validation for everything Harold had said. The next morning, she brought the documents to him. They met in the quiet lounge on the executive floor. Benjamin had gone to retrieve tea, leaving them briefly alone. Haley placed the papers on the table between them and signed, "You were not alone. You were just outnumbered." Harold read the pages slowly, his eyes narrowing. When he finished, he didn't react with anger. Just sadness. He signed carefully, "This company doesn't have a short memory. It has selective memory." Haley nodded. "We're changing that." "You are," he replied. "But not everyone is ready to remember." Later that week, she was invited to a private meeting with 2 members of the executive team, both of whom had voted in favor of the initiative. The meeting was cordial. Professional. But every sentence was laced with undertone. "We admire your clarity. We support transparency. We just want to make sure the tone is sustainable." They didn't ask her to stop. They asked her to slow down. Haley listened, nodded, left the meeting, and didn't change a single line in her next document. That Friday, during the first internal town hall preview of the new initiative, Haley took the stage for the first time. Not as a guest. Not as a token. As a speaker. She opened with Harold's original line, translated into spoken word and signed language simultaneously. "Culture is not policy. It is behavior." And then, with the room holding its breath, she added her own. "And behavior is a choice. One we must make again, together." In the front row, Harold sat beside Benjamin, watching. When she stepped off stage, Jonah met her behind the curtain. "You just set the tone for everything that comes next," he said. She nodded. She was ready. The Monday after the internal town hall was unlike any other day Haley had experienced at Cortec. The buzz was no longer subtle. It echoed in elevator conversations, passed through Slack channels in half-coded emojis and text threads, and filled the cafeteria with speculation. People had opinions. Strong ones. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her authority. A few avoided her altogether. But the initiative had been activated. Now came the hardest part, execution. The first major assignment was a company-wide campaign titled "Bridges, Not Walls," focused on promoting accessibility, empathy, and cross-functional communication. It included internal workshops, micro-trainings, digital awareness content, and, most controversially, mandatory participation from senior management. Haley was tasked with leading the communications rollout. Jonah assigned her a support team of 5, each from different departments. 2 welcomed the collaboration. 1 remained silent. And 2 made it clear, from the start, that they didn't think she deserved her place at the table. One of them, Alex Marsh, had been with the company for over 12 years. He was sharp, ambitious, and known for steering clear of anything that couldn't be measured in quarterly performance reports. During their first team sync, Alex didn't even look at her. "I'm still unclear why a temporary communications intern is leading a company-wide campaign," he said. Haley kept her voice steady. "Because I was assigned to." "That's not an answer," he replied. "It's the only one you need right now." Jonah, sitting in the corner of the room, didn't intervene. After the meeting, Haley found him standing by the window in his office. "You're going to have to earn their cooperation," he said. "Even when they don't deserve yours." "I'm not interested in being liked," Haley replied. "That's good," he said. "Because you're not going to be." What followed were the most difficult 3 weeks of her professional life. The first draft of the campaign narrative was picked apart, not on substance, but tone. One executive noted it was too earnest. Another suggested they swap out empathy for efficiency of inclusion. The feedback didn't come in one meeting but through dozens of small edits, back-channel suggestions, and departmental redlines disguised as alignment. Then came the metrics debate. How do we measure cultural shift? Someone asked during a planning session. We can't track empathy on a spreadsheet. I don't think the issue is empathy, Alex said. It's relevance. The room fell silent. What do you mean? Haley asked. He leaned back in his chair. I mean, is this campaign even solving the right problem? Or are we just performing concern? No one responded. The silence stung more than the words. Later that night, Haley stayed behind to revise the strategy deck. Alone in the quiet, she began rewriting the section titles. Not for them, but for herself. Not relevance. Responsibility. Not performance. Presence. Not compliance. Connection. She didn't add these to the final version. But she carried the words into every meeting afterward. The internal backlash began in subtle ways. One of her emails was left out of a departmental thread that directly affected her team. A calendar invite for a senior strategy review went missing from her inbox. A version of the campaign materials was sent to the executive floor without her approval, and it had been edited to soften all her language. She confronted Jonah about it. It's sabotage, she said. It's fear, he replied. Sabotage is a tool people use when they're afraid the ground is shifting beneath them. Then what do we do? He gave her a tired smile. We keep building. The pressure took a toll. She stopped sleeping well. Her appetite disappeared. One morning, she caught herself staring at her reflection in the office bathroom mirror, unable to recognize the exhaustion behind her own eyes. But she didn't stop. What kept her going were the messages she continued to receive, quiet notes left on her desk, emails from employees in departments she'd never worked with. I've been here 14 years and never felt like I had permission to speak. Until now. I joined the ASL course you suggested. My brother's deaf. I'd never told anyone that before. Thank you for putting a name to the quiet. It wasn't volume that drove her. It was truth. Still, the moment that tested her most came unexpectedly, during a cross-departmental review session with HR, operations, and legal. The meeting had been running for over an hour, mostly focusing on rollout logistics. Then, mid-presentation, Alex interrupted again. This is all well and good, he said, flipping through the printed deck. But the cost of implementation is rising. Resources are being pulled. And, frankly, I still haven't seen proof that this is delivering any actual value. Haley stared at him, then looked around the room. No one jumped to defend her. So she stood. This initiative doesn't exist to justify our budget, she said. It exists because we let silence become structure. Because we called efficiency what was actually neglect. Because for years, people like Harold Whitmore, our own founder, were erased not by malice, but by convenience. She took a breath. And if you need a spreadsheet to prove the value of empathy, then I'm not the one who's out of place here. The room froze. Alex said nothing. She left the meeting without another word. That night, she went home expecting fallout. Instead, she found an email waiting from Richard Thompson. I heard what you said today. You were right. Don't adjust. Let the company catch up. Attached was an updated authorization letter for the next phase of the campaign, signed personally by the CEO, with expanded authority for Haley to oversee all internal comms related to the rollout. It didn't solve everything. But it gave her the one thing she needed most. Momentum. The next morning, when she entered the office, she was greeted by something she hadn't expected, silence, but not the kind she feared. A few team members nodded. One offered a quiet, "Good morning." Even Alex glanced her way, not apologetically, but with acknowledgement. Harold sent her a message that afternoon. Every movement feels like failure right before it changes the room. She pinned it to her wall. Because the room was changing. And she was still standing in the center of it. The day of the Internal Leadership Summit arrived with little ceremony but high expectation. It was to be the first event of its kind since the launch of the Inclusion Initiative, an open forum between executives, department heads, and selected employees from various tiers. The invitation list was deliberate, curated by Jonah and a few others who wanted representation, not just rank. Haley had been asked to open the session alongside Harold. It wasn't a stage in the traditional sense. The space had been reconfigured from the old auditorium on the 9th floor, carpeted, intimate, ringed with semicircles of chairs. The usual podium was gone. In its place stood a circular rug and 2 stools. Harold had insisted on the format. No platforms, he signed. Just people. Haley arrived early, the silver communication pin now worn openly on her lapel. She wasn't nervous, not in the way she had been in past meetings. There was too much clarity now, too much necessity. She didn't have to prove herself anymore. She had something far more powerful than permission. Purpose. Benjamin arrived with Harold just before the room filled. Harold looked calm, composed. He greeted Haley with a firm nod. His eyes scanned the space, and for a moment, a flicker of something passed through him. Not nostalgia. Something more grounded. Like he was taking inventory of the soil he had once helped till. As the crowd settled, Jonah stepped to the center and gave a brief, direct welcome. This isn't a speech. It's a conversation. We're not here to check a box. We're here to hold a mirror. Then he stepped back. Haley stood first. Harold followed, slowly but without help. She began to speak. Not from a script. From truth. We're here today because something was lost, she said. And we're not here to blame. We're here to understand. To remember what connection looks like in a place that moves too fast to make eye contact. She turned to Harold. He began to sign. Haley translated. When I first came here, he signed, we were 30 people in a rented office. We had 1 coffee pot, 2 phones, and too much belief. We argued. We laughed. We struggled. But we saw each other. He paused. That disappeared slowly. Not all at once. First it was process over people. Then it was efficiency over understanding. Eventually, it was silence over discomfort. His hands moved with precision. His gaze swept the room. Then one person said hello. Haley's voice broke slightly, but she recovered. That's all it took. Not a policy. Not a campaign. A hello. The room was still. Harold sat, and Haley followed. What happened next wasn't planned. One of the department heads from engineering, someone Haley barely knew, stood. I have a confession, she said. 2 years ago, I removed captions from our demo videos because we were behind schedule. No one questioned it. But reading your brief, Haley, I realized something. I stopped asking who we were making things for. She sat down. Another stood. A project manager from logistics. My father was deaf, she said. I never learned to sign. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. Working here, I did the same thing with people like him. Like Harold. Like others. I'm learning now. Then another. And another. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It was quiet, collective honesty. A room of professionals speaking like human beings. Jonah stepped forward again. We're not asking for guilt. We're asking for engagement. For presence. For real accountability. He looked at Haley. Tell them about the next step. Haley stood. We're launching an opt-in cohort, she announced. A volunteer program. Employees from every department. They'll help shape the next wave of policies. Not just sign off on them, but design them. She paused. There's no incentive. No title. Just impact. The sign-up form was posted within the hour. By end of day, over 70 people had registered. One of the first was Alex Marsh. He didn't approach Haley after. He didn't explain himself. He simply wrote his name and department and submitted the form. Later that week, the executive floor installed a new wall plaque in the main hallway, one no one had seen before it went up. It read, "Culture is not policy. It is behavior. Let us remember that inclusion is not an initiative. It is a return." Below it, 2 names. Harold Whitmore. Haley Morgan. The following Monday, Haley received a short message from Melissa Huang. "The CEO requests your presence Thursday. Informal. No agenda. Just reflection." She arrived at the same office where she'd first been called months ago, where she'd once felt like a mistake that had gotten too far through the system. This time, Thompson greeted her with 2 mugs of coffee already poured. "I heard the summit went better than expected." "I think it went the way it was supposed to," Haley replied. He nodded. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You're no longer an intern. Your contract's been updated. But the offer goes beyond title." Haley raised her eyebrows slightly. "We want you to lead the permanent division," Thompson said. "Director of Inclusion and Internal Culture. Full department. Autonomy. Budget. Seat at the table." Haley blinked. "I'm 22, she said. "You're not being asked because of age," he replied. "You're being asked because you changed this company without permission. Now I want to see what you do with it." She didn't answer right away. "I'll need time," she said. "You have it." He stood and extended his hand. "Whatever you decide, you've already done something most people never get to do." "What's that?" "Made us remember who we said we wanted to be." Haley shook his hand. She left the office not with certainty, but with clarity. The decision wasn't about status or title. It was about direction. And she was beginning to understand what it meant to lead, not from the front, but from beside. With hands open. And eyes truly seeing. The office looked different now. Not in the way furniture had been rearranged or signage replaced, though those changes were starting too, but in the way people walked the halls. More eye contact. More pauses in conversation. More acknowledgement of the space around them, and the people in it. Haley noticed it most during the quieter moments, the shift in tone during department stand-ups, the invitations to speak during meetings she hadn't even been part of previously, the way some of the most skeptical colleagues now lingered after presentations, not to challenge, but to ask how they could help. She hadn't yet responded to the offer from the CEO. It was still sitting in her inbox, flagged, unread, but never forgotten. A formal offer for a permanent position as Director of Inclusion and Internal Culture. She knew accepting it meant not going back to the plans she had made before this internship. Graduate school, nonprofit work, even teaching. But every day that passed, the decision felt less like a question of opportunity and more like one of responsibility. Especially after Harold came back. For the first time in years, Harold began visiting the office regularly, once a week at first, then twice. He didn't stay long. He never made announcements. He simply appeared, walked the halls, stopped to observe meetings, and occasionally nodded in approval when someone greeted him in ASL. He had become something more than a founder now. He was a symbol of what had been forgotten, and what was slowly being restored. One afternoon, Haley accompanied him on his walk through the lower floors. They didn't speak at first. She simply walked beside him while he moved slowly from room to room, stopping now and then to look at the walls, the displays, the photographs from company events that had long excluded him. In one conference room, he pointed to an old group photo, 10 years old, maybe more. He signed, "I'm in the frame, but I wasn't in the room." Haley understood. They made their way to the 6th floor, where the first ASL training session was in progress. Through the glass walls, Haley could see about 20 employees sitting in a semicircle, watching an instructor lead a lesson on greetings and basic conversation. Harold stood still, watching for a long moment. Then he smiled. He signed to her, "This is what a company looks like when it begins to listen." Later that evening, Haley stayed behind, reviewing survey responses from the first phase of the initiative. Some of them were formal, as expected, filled with phrases like enhanced communication protocols and measurable impact. But others were more honest. I didn't realize how much I filtered my own voice until someone gave me permission to use it. This feels less like a company now and more like a place where I'm allowed to be a person. I didn't know who Harold was. Now I'll never forget. There were still complaints. Pushback. Not everyone was ready to change. But that wasn't new. The difference was that now, resistance didn't go unchallenged. There were conversations. Consequences. And most importantly, a growing number of employees willing to speak up, not just for themselves, but for each other. The next morning, she was called into a meeting with Clara Hensley from HR. Haley entered the room cautiously, unsure of the tone this conversation would take. But Clara was different this time. Less guarded. More reflective. "I wanted to speak to you personally," Clara said. "About something I didn't say earlier." Haley sat, waiting. "You came in as an intern. You could have done your time quietly and left. But you didn't. You changed the trajectory of this place. And in doing so, you reminded me of why I got into this field." Haley said nothing. "I was part of the silence," Clara continued. "Not loudly, but passively. I let things slide. I let Harold disappear. And I let others follow." Clara took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." Haley nodded. "Thank you." Clara reached into a folder and handed Haley a printed copy of the formal offer from the CEO's office. "You haven't responded. He wanted me to follow up." "I know," Haley said. "I've been thinking. You have every right to say no. But if you say yes, just know you won't be alone in this anymore." Haley took the folder. That night, she went home and stared at the offer letter. Her apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of traffic outside the window. She thought about everything: her first day, that moment in the lobby, the weight of Harold's hand, the whispered criticism, the turning tide. She opened her laptop and wrote a message to Thompson. It was short. "I accept." The reply came minutes later. "Good. Let's get to work." The following weeks moved quickly. The Bridges, Not Walls campaign entered its second phase. Workshops were extended, feedback loops established, and a new employee-led committee formed to oversee long-term goals. Haley began hosting monthly listening sessions, informal forums where anyone could come, speak, and be heard. At the first session, a young intern named Marcus stood up. Nervous, hands shaking, he introduced himself and said, "I don't really know what I'm doing here. I'm new. I didn't think anyone would notice me. But then someone told me that the person who started all this was just like me once." He looked at Haley and smiled. "That gave me courage." After the session, she walked through the lobby alone. It was nearly empty. The lights were dimmed. And there, on the far wall, a new plaque had been installed. Simple, brushed metal. No logos. No fanfare. Communication is respect. Let no one be unseen. Underneath, two names. Harold Whitmore. Haley Morgan. She stood there for a long time, remembering. The day she walked into this building, she had wanted to disappear. Now, she was helping others be seen. And it was only the beginning. 6 months passed. CoreTech Dynamics had not become a perfect company, but it had become a listening one. The internal culture initiative that began as a reluctant experiment had evolved into a living framework embedded in how the company operated. What had once been a top-down structure now included real lateral feedback loops. Training programs that had gathered dust were revitalized, and new ones were created from the ground up by the very employees who had once felt voiceless. And every Friday morning at 8:30, without fail, Haley sat in the first-floor atrium. It had become a quiet ritual. She arrived with her notebook and a coffee, took the same seat near the tall windows where Harold once sat waiting alone, and listened to the rhythm of the building waking up. Security guards greeted her by name. Receptionists who had once barely noticed interns now exchanged updates on their families, their weekend plans, even their ASL practice. It wasn't ceremony. It was community. Harold, now attending only on rare occasions, had slowed down. His health required rest. But whenever he did visit, he always made time to walk past that same window, tap the glass once, and smile at Haley through it before continuing on. He had told her once, in their last long conversation, "I spent so many years believing legacy was something you built alone. But what matters most is what you give away." Haley carried those words like scripture. Her new office, modest but filled with natural light, was on the 12th floor, the same floor where she had once been quietly warned to know her place. The irony was not lost on her. The walls bore no awards, no titles. Only photographs of team sessions, open forums, town halls, and candid moments of employees laughing together, signing together, listening together. At her desk sat a framed note, now slightly faded. It was the sticky note someone had once left anonymously. "Know your place." But underneath it, written in her own hand, she had added, "I did. I chose it." That morning, as Haley reviewed the outline for an upcoming cross-departmental initiative on inclusive hiring pipelines, her assistant, yes, she now had one, knocked gently on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says he's the new intern." "Marcus?" Haley smiled. "Send him in." Marcus entered, tall, clearly nervous, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his bag. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked as he sat. "I do," Haley said. "You spoke at one of our listening sessions a few months ago. First time you ever spoke in front of a group." He relaxed slightly. "That was because of you." She shook her head. "It was because of you. I just made space." He nodded, then hesitated. "I've been assigned to shadow your department this quarter," he said. "I'm excited, but honestly, a little overwhelmed." Haley leaned back in her chair. "Good. You should be. You're stepping into a place where you get to do more than just check boxes. You get to ask questions, notice what others miss, and, if you're brave enough, act on it." Marcus looked at her, unsure. "I'm not sure I know how." "You don't have to yet," she said. "You just have to stay open." She stood and gestured for him to follow her. They walked down the hallway, past the open plan workstations and the whiteboard walls now filled with multilingual messages of encouragement and gratitude. Through the glass meeting rooms, employees from every background, department, and title engaged in authentic dialogue, some using spoken word, others signing, still others writing on notepads before speaking aloud. Haley led Marcus down to the lobby. As they stepped into the sunlight spilling across the marble floors, she paused near the far wall, where a new installation had recently been unveiled. It was modest, but elegant, a series of vertical glass panels etched with the first names of employees, past and present, who had participated in the company's transformation. There were hundreds. Some names appeared more than once, linked by a thread of small raised lines representing conversation. Underneath the installation was a single sentence. "Every voice is a bridge. Every silence, a chance to listen." Haley turned to Marcus. "Look at it closely," she said. He stepped forward. As his eyes scanned the names, he paused. At the bottom of one panel, near the center, he saw it. "Haley, first listener." He looked back at her, unsure how to respond. She smiled. It wasn't about speaking first. It was about noticing first. They returned to the atrium. A new group of interns had just arrived, clustered near the reception desk. Some clutched their notebooks. Others stared awkwardly at their surroundings, trying not to be the first to ask where the elevators were. Haley watched them, remembering herself in their place. The way her feet had once felt too loud on this floor. The way her voice had felt too small for the building. She noticed one intern, standing slightly apart from the rest. A young woman with tight shoulders and eyes fixed on the floor. She looked overwhelmed. Disconnected. Without thinking, Haley stepped forward. She approached slowly, offering a calm, steady smile. "Hi. Welcome," she said. "First day?" The woman nodded. "I'm Haley. What's your name?" "Leah," she said softly. Haley extended her hand. "Let me show you something." She led Leah across the lobby, toward the installation, letting her take it in. Then, they sat by the tall windows where everything had once begun. Marcus joined them a few moments later. Leah looked at them both, visibly more at ease. Haley reached into her bag and pulled out a slim booklet, an internal guide the new department had created titled Seeing People. She handed it to Leah. "This is yours now." As they sat, the lobby slowly began to fill. Employees passed by, some recognizing Haley and waving, others simply nodding. The rhythm of the day was beginning. Phones would ring. Presentations would be given. Deadlines would be met. But for a few minutes, by the window, 3 people sat quietly, holding space for something bigger than productivity. Haley glanced toward the plaque on the wall. The one that had started as an idea, then a conversation, then a movement. Communication is respect. Let no one be unseen. She smiled. Because it hadn't been a grand gesture that changed the company. It had been a simple hello. Signed with care. Spoken without fear. And passed forward, again and again.